This is the latest installment in the While We're Still Here series. The man who published his first story at 96 years of age. Have you ever carried a story so long that you almost forgot it was worth telling? While we're still here, I'd like to tell you about someone who decided he wasn't finished yet. His name, Harry Bernstein. Now, maybe it happened years ago, maybe decades ago, something that shaped you, but life kept moving on. Man, can it do that? And you never quite got around to putting it into words. I know that feeling too well. There was a man who carried his story for almost a century. And I already told you his name, Harry Bernstein. Now, Harry, he didn't grow up famous. He grew up poor in England in the early 1900s. His family lived in a neighborhood divided by religion and suspicion. On one side of the street were the Jewish families, like his. On the other side was the Christian families. And right down the middle, there was a wall. Not a big wall, just big enough to remind everyone where they were supposed to belong. Harry grew up watching that wall every day, watching how people could live just a few feet apart and still feel like strangers. Life moved on, the way life always does. Harry grew up, he went to work, he moved to America, raised a family, worked hard, and paid his bills. You know, the kind of man I'm talking about. He had the kind of life that a lot of men live, the kind of life that doesn't leave much time for writing books, for telling your story. But the story of that street and that wall never really left him. Years passed, decades passed. Sadly, his wife passed. And one day, when Harry was 93 years old, he sat down at a table and he started to write. Not because a publisher asked him to, not because anyone was waiting for it. He just had carried the story long enough, and he began to put it down on paper. Memories of his childhood, memories of that wall, and memories of the people who were more alike than they realized. That book eventually became The Invisible Wall, and something remarkable happened. People listened. Just gives me so much hope for somebody that's 70, 65, 75, because we don't know the difference we can make in the fourth chapter of our life. And in fact, it's the only chapter in our life that we were capable of making these kind of changes, because it took 70 years for me to get to the point where I even understand my story. But Harry's book was published when he was 96 years old. Readers all over the world picked it up. And suddenly a man who had quietly carried his story for nearly a century was finally heard. At 96 years old, think about that for a moment. Most of the world would have told him his time had passed. Move on. But the truth is, his story needed all those years, all that living, and all that perspective. You know, the truth is sometimes a story doesn't fully ripen until a man has lived long enough to understand it himself. And that makes me wonder about something else. How many stories are sitting quietly inside ordinary people right now, all around the world? Stories about work, family, about mistakes, and second chances. I love that idea. I love the idea of second chances. And for some of us, it's the third, fourth, or fifth chance. But as so long as when we get knocked down, we get back up, we can have a second chance. You know, the stories that we might be telling someone about these second chances, it could help someone else if they're simply told. Now, I don't think everyone needs to go write a book. That's not my point. But here's what I've learned. Something life has shown you, and it could benefit someone else if they could hear it. A conversation, a letter, a memory shared with a grandchild. You never know which words might travel the furthest. And they might travel further than you ever expected. Harry Bernstein waited 96 years before the world read his story. And as it turned out, it wasn't too late after all. So while we're still here, our story isn't finished. It's just another chapter waiting for you to write it. So if you have a story, drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear what it is. I'm sure many people would. So as always, be well, be safe, and be happy. I'm Grandpa Chuck. Thank you so much for watching. And hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye now.